Hello, Tech fans, and welcome in to the latest Tech Sideline Podcast, originating from TSL's high-tech studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Whether you are watching or listening, we are so glad that you could join us today as we record on Wednesday, August 28th, and get you set for the season opener, Virginia Tech and Boston College, set to kick it off at 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. We've got Malcolm, yes, he's related, Stewart behind the scenes producing, and here on the new Tech Sideline set, managing editor Chris Coleman and our founder and head honcho Will Stewart. My name is Evan Hughes. Gentlemen, happy game week to you guys. The coaches always talk about how it's a busy first week for the football team. How is the first week of Tech Sideline leading up to the first game of the year?
I was at work till about 10:30 or 11 o'clock last night, doing some stuff for the set, and man, it's interesting. We're going to talk about that today. And I was also managing a crisis related to Stick It In Ale last night. So, I was here till about 10:30 or 11 last night.
I was at home, and then the Brock Hoffman news came out. So you never know what time you're called upon to work this time of year. And the first week is kind of hectic anyway. You've got your editorial schedule planned out, but nothing ever falls exactly how you want it to fall. So, but it's a testing week for everybody, I guess.
Sure. Well, listen, you mentioned Brock Hoffman. You mentioned Stick It In Ale. Those are all topics that we're going to be talking about today on the Tech Sideline Podcast. Of course, the big news that came out last night on Tuesday evening, Brock Hoffman will not be eligible this year, the transfer offensive lineman from Coastal Carolina. We'll get reaction from Will and Chris. We will also be talking about Stick It In Ale, some of the big news this summer that came about from Tech Sideline. We'll be talking about that. Plus, we've got new additions to the set. If you're watching on Facebook or however you're streaming or watching archive, we have made some new additions. We'll talk to Will about that. And we'll preview Boston College, the Hokies and the Eagles playing this Saturday at 4 o'clock in Chestnut Hill. We'll get predictions, analysis, and more. All that coming up on the Tech Sideline Podcast. Again, recording at about 10 in the morning on Wednesday, August the 28th. A reminder that this week and every week, the TSL Podcast is presented by the Fisher Law Firm, Virginia's trusted DUI and traffic defense firm, dedicated to defending individuals charged with traffic-related offenses. From their offices in Blacksburg and Roanoke, the Fisher Law Firm handles cases throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. To date, the firm has defended more than 30,000 people charged with moving violations. For a free consultation, call anytime, day or evening, toll-free at 1-800-680-7031 or email them at info@fisherlegal.com. Will, I want to turn it over to you because you have been working hard this summer. We talked about the additions to the studio and the upgrades that we made as a podcast. We'll talk about what's new from Monday's podcast today. But let's lead off with this. Stick It In Ale is now available, the Tech Sideline beer. How did this all come about, and how has the launch gone so far?
Okay, so I'll try to keep this relatively short. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that we have a Tech Sideline beer now. It's called Stick It In Ale. And here's how that came about, and Chris can help me with some of the details early. We were tailgating at Smithfield, one of the early games last year, and all I remember is I don't remember things very well these days, but I remember Chris handing me a business card of Elizabeth Geiger, who's a Hokie and who works for Beltway Brewing Company up in Sterling, Virginia. And I remember Chris telling me they want to do a Virginia Tech themed beer, right?
Yeah. I basically went up to you and said, hey, I have a friend who has a friend who runs a brewery in Northern Virginia, and they want to do a Virginia Tech themed beer. Here's their business card.
All right, so this is September, and I'm thinking, we got no bandwidth during football season, so I filed that one away, and I put that business card over there on my desk where I could see it. And finally, after football season was over, I reached out to Elizabeth. And it's funny, people ask me about how it came about. And we just kind of winged it. It really wasn't this. We didn't sit down to do a business case analysis or a plan or any of that sort of stuff. I called her up on the phone. She said, we want to do a Virginia Tech themed beer. And I said, great. So I emailed Clark Rulin, who goes by Hokie20 on Twitter. Most people know who Clark is. And Clark is, he's a graphics guy, a bit of a designer, and he's a good idea guy.
I believe his Twitter bio is he's jack of all trades, which he really is.
That's accurate. Yeah.
So I emailed Clark and I literally said, want to do something fun? Make me up a Virginia Tech themed beer. And I didn't give him any guidelines at all. And he comes back with this can design that's almost exactly like what you see today. He wanted to call it Stick It In Ale, and the tagline underneath it is, "This beer will get after you." You know, so if surely everybody listening to this podcast is familiar with Stick It In, which is a chant and a cheer that the band used to do. That was banned in 2007 by the athletic director at the time, Jim Weaver.
Actually, banned by the administration. We understand.
Yeah, that's
not Jim
true.
Weaver. Weaver fell on the sword for the administration.
And Weaver was good about that stuff, and that's part of the reason that the BOV and administration liked Jim is they'd tell him what to do, and if it was unpopular, he'd be out front on it and take all the heat. He didn't have a problem doing that. Now, there's a whole story there that we don't really have the time to get into, but that was all Clark's design. There's been very little modification of the design. So I took it to the people at Beltway, and what they did is they white labeled one of their in-house beers. Now, Beltway is what's called a contract brewing company. They will make your beer for you. That's how they got their start. So if you're starting up a brewery and you don't have the capital to buy all your own equipment, they'll brew your recipe. If your brewery is growing and you need extra capacity, they will brew your recipe. But after time, of course, they started getting into doing their own beers. And one of them that they did was, and what this one is, it's a blonde ale. It's their HOV blonde ale. It's the way they described it to me, it's an easy drinking beer. It's good for tailgating, 5.2% ABV. So Clark's label stuck on Beltway Brewing Company's beer, and we launched it in July. We had a launch event. Now, at first, you could only get it at Beltway. You had to actually drive to the brewery. So we had a launch event on July 12th, and at the time, they'd made something like 175 cases. And when we left that night, they were down to 65 cases. So now we took some of it out of there with us. You know, that wasn't all purchased by people at the event, but most of it was. So they had 65 cases left, and that was on a Friday night. They sold some more that weekend. They opened the following Wednesday and sold out just within a few minutes. They did a second run later of another 99 cases that sold out in 2 or 3 days. So to this point, you've only been able to get it if you actually drive to the brewery. But I am pleased to announce that they have struck up deals with distributors, one in Northern Virginia. I do not remember the name of the distributor up there, but they've also got a deal with Blue Ridge Beverage in Salem. And Blue Ridge is going to get it into stores and bars in Blacksburg in time for football season. So what's today's date, the 28th of
August
August?
28th.
All right. So next Tuesday, Blue Ridge is scheduled to drive up to Beltway Brewing Company and pick up a load of beer and bring it down to the New River Valley and Roanoke and et cetera. I do not at this point have a list of everywhere it's going to be, but I think it's going to be pretty readily available. So keep an eye on the website. We'll let you know on the podcast. I hope on the website to just have a list of places you can go. Everybody's been so busy, I haven't had a chance to really talk to them. But I think you're going to be able to buy this in Kroger. I think it's going to be that accessible.
Probably Vintage Cellar.
Vintage Cellar. You know, I'll get the list from Blue Ridge, and we'll definitely get it out there. Now, what I wanted to say about this is it's been a really cool thing because it brings Hokies together. They love it. They think it's a riot. It catches fire every time they put it on social media. And we make a little bit of money off of it, but all the profit we make off of it goes towards paying for our endowed scholarship in the communications department and the sports media and analytics concentration. In case you're not filled in on that, Tech Sideline endowed a scholarship in sports media and analytics in the Virginia Tech communications department. So we're paying $100,000 a year over the course of 5 years, and we're 1 year into that, so we've put in $20,000 in. So any profit that comes to us off the sale of Stick It In Ale just goes to that, and we hope over time to do more charitable and philanthropic stuff. But this is the start.
And I'm pleased to say too that so sports media analytics, what Bill Roth helped launch and is still a huge part of right now, leading the program. It is now a standalone major this year. So it was a concentration.
This year it is a
this
major.
year. So actually, I am no longer a multimedia journalism major. I am a sports media analytics major. So
nice.
A lot of exciting things going on. And of course, I know from the students, we're just so thankful to Tech Sideline and the awesome partnership that you guys have. So
yeah, and I don't know if they've been able to award any scholarship money yet from what we've put in. There's some lag on this, but eventually it'll be $100,000. It'll be more than that because Tech fans have also contributed more to it. My guess is it's going to wind up at $110,000, $120,000, $130,000, and Virginia Tech will invest that, and the principal will stay. But the money they make off of it will go towards a deserving student as to help pay for being in the sports media and analytics major at Virginia Tech.
It's exciting. Now up to 4 majors available in the comm department, continues to grow, big numbers this year. So a lot of exciting things going on.
Bill's done a great job growing that, man. We'll get him on here again and talk to him about it.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into game week prep, shall we? With Virginia Tech football finally being back in session this week, Saturday against Boston College. But before we do that, I initially had planned last night when I had finished prepping for this to ask Chris about the depth chart, which we'll get to. But the depth chart that came out Monday after our podcast will have a little bit of a tweak to it because of the ruling from the NCAA that Brock Hoffman, a transfer offensive lineman from Coastal Carolina, was ruled ineligible for the season. He will redshirt and have 2 years of eligibility beginning in 2020. For those that don't remember, he transferred trying to get home closer to his mother, Stephanie, who had surgery to correct an acoustic neuroma, a non-cancerous brain tumor, in January of 2017. He decided to transfer to be closer to her, make it easier on her to attend games. Now, initially, there was a waiver filed earlier in the year of 2019, and there's a 100-mile radius that applies to cases such as these. And Hoffman's home in North Carolina is 5 miles outside of that 100-mile radius for Blacksburg. That's why it was denied. So, Chris,
depending upon what you dial in to Google Maps or whatever. Sorry to interrupt.
No. So there was a new appeal, and that came back yesterday. Chris, before we get into reactions, can you explain to us a little bit of what that appeal went into, how it was different from the first one?
Well, not really. I mean, there's so much that I haven't had a chance to read it all, to be honest.
Well,
with you.
it's not just that, but I'm not sure how much information is available.
I know originally they had 2 avenues to apply for a waiver to play, and one was obviously the medical reason, his mom. That's what they applied under. The other was the stuff that the Tate Martells and Justin Fields applied under, the coaching changes or whatever.
The general category of hardship, you think?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
I'll freely admit that he and I aren't really super up to speed on this stuff. We don't know letter and verse.
Right. But as it turned out, his coach ended up leaving Coastal Carolina, and if he had applied under the other guideline or whatever, I think he probably would have gotten it. But he didn't. And he was denied in April, and they submitted an appeal, which was also denied. And according to Andy Bitter, the final reasoning was it took him too long to transfer between the time of his mom's illness and surgery. I understand where the NCAA is coming from, because I think a lot of guys do abuse some of their rules when it comes to transfers. I don't think that's the case with Brock at all. But I also think that the fact that there's no human beings involved in the process. It's a bunch of seriously. It's here. Fill this form out and mail it back to us.
And there's
nobody picks up a phone and talks to anybody.
So one of the pieces of information that came out in this rejection is that the NCAA didn't talk to Brock or his family at all.
Right. So and I understand where the NCAA is coming from when it comes to, you wait a long time to file the appeal after you get good, and not file the appeal. You wait a long time to decide to transfer.
Right.
You wait until after you start for 2 years and you get FBS interest. Because if he had transferred,
that's the cynical view.
That's the cynical viewpoint from the NCAA. And without picking up the phone and talking to anybody involved in the process, I understand how they feel that way. But sometimes with some of these cases, I think you have to meet with the individuals and let them explain it to them. And I'm sure Brock would have told them, you know what, I didn't want to go back on my verbal. I just enrolled. They spent a lot of time recruiting me, and I wanted to stick it out. I wanted to honor my commitment that I gave them. And after a couple of years, it just got too hard. But you can't really say that if you're not talking to anybody, right? You can't hear that side of the story. You can't hear the human side of each story if you're the NCAA, if you're not talking to people. Now, it's a 7-person committee, and we don't know.
We don't know who's on it.
We don't know who's on it. I don't know the total number of transfers.
We don't know what workload they're facing.
Right. Right. Sure. I think it should be a little bit more.
Is the word you're looking for transparent?
No, not necessarily transparent. I think it should be more simple. I think a lot of transfer requests are fairly simple, and these days, honestly, coaches can leave whenever they want, and they don't have to sit out a year. Regular students can transfer without sitting out a year, right? Well, I'm going to go to ODU. Oh, well, sorry, you're going to have to sit out a year.
You could have to sit out and work at McDonald's for a year.
Yeah, exactly. Olympic sports athletes can transfer without sitting out a year in a lot of cases.
That's what I think Jay Billis has been saying. I actually didn't know that.
Right. Yeah. So I have a problem with the transfer thing in general, and I don't think it would lead to free agency in football any more than than we already have free agency in football.
So somebody actually said on Twitter, hey, I got it, and he admitted this was a hot take. He said, hey, I got an idea, just no transfer rules at all. And I said, well, the problem with that is it would allow the Alabamas and the Clemsons, who already have their pick of pretty much whoever they want in recruiting, they could just take their pick of whoever they wanted among active players. Just look out there and see who's doing well and kind of say, hey, why don't you come play for Clemson your last 2 years since you're an all Sun Belt or all Pac-12 offensive lineman,
Now, let me make sure I get the pronunciation right because I want to get in front. Mike,
I think it's Nizilak.
Mike Nizilak of the Roanoke Times actually put out an article late Tuesday night. I had quotes from Brock's parents, and
so fill us in on that because I didn't get a chance to.
They really did everything they could according to this article, and they provided documentation from 4 separate doctors on, and they really did everything in their power. And Brock put out a very strong, what's the best way to put it? He put out a very gracious, thank you, that's a great word, gracious statement. And then to the next of the statement, I want to get y'all's thoughts on this. He had put a picture of the Boz.
Brian Bosworth, Oklahoma.
Who wore his famous NCAA shirt, which stands for National Communists Against Student Athletes, Welcome to Russia.
Back when, when the Soviet Union was a thing, man.
And Brock's tweet got a lot of love, as it should on Twitter.
I thought it was funny.
What did you make of him putting that out there?
He's got nothing to lose.
Obviously, it was a well-written message. I don't think you just come up with an idea of the Brian Bosworth picture out of the blue. I think that took some time to think about.
Thinking about that.
And honestly, Brock's not old enough to remember Brian Bosworth. I'm barely old enough to remember Brian Bosworth.
You may watch the 30 for 30.
Yeah,
or something
who knows?
Like
that, I never knew Brian Bosworth wore that T-shirt. I don't really know anything.
I knew, yeah.
So anyway,
because I think Bosworth's beef with the NCAA was they were telling him not to wear headbands or something. Or am I getting him confused with Jim McMahon? It all starts to run together. But anyway, go ahead.
I forgot the question.
Well, we were talking about the tweet.
Oh, we were talking about the tweet.
The picture, yes.
I'm sorry, I got about 4 hours of sleep last night.
Not because he was building shelves.
Not because I was building shelves. I thought it was a fair response, but you also have to. You don't want to go too far. You don't want to make the NCAA mad. The last time a Virginia Tech student athlete made the NCAA mad was when Bruce Smith sued them over bowl eligibility back in the early '80s, and 3 years later they slapped the athletic department with 5 or 6 years of probation for both football and men's basketball.
And conspiracy theorists think that the NCAA was hating on Virginia Tech for years and years and years. There's a long list of just terrible seeds and terrible matchups in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I wouldn't go that far.
I know. It's
I think that's silly, but
it's fun to say they're all out to get us.
Yeah, of course it is. But sometimes it's better to just be quiet and take the result. Because there's nothing you can do about it. Now don't get me wrong. His tweet's not going to hurt anything at all. But Virginia Tech can't. There's nothing Virginia Tech can't.
I'm not sure the NCAA looks through their ats on Twitter.
Probably not.
Because there must be a blue million of them.
Well,
People blast away at the NCAA all the time.
I mean, somebody sees them, but it's not like they run up to the front office and say, well, here's a list of the tweets where people blasted you today.
I don't think the social media manager for the NCAA is drawing up a list.
No, absolutely not. So I don't think it really matters either way. Virginia Tech's press release was a little bit passive-aggressive, I thought.
What part of it was passive-aggressive?
Oh, I mean,
I skimmed it. It said we're going to support Brock and his family.
We're going to support Brock and his family. They went into a little bit of detail about his mom's illness. They pointed out the fact that he had a 4.0 GPA.
That was passive-aggressive.
Right, exactly. Not that I particularly blame them. My one whole question is, and while I completely disagree with the NCAA's decision and there needs to be a more human element involved in that process, why did it take Virginia Tech until July to initiate the appeal process when they got the original ruling in April?
Well, my tinfoil hat says that was intentional. Conspiracy theory,
Why would that be intentional?
Oh, they're just trying to, they took a lot of heat when it was first announced that they rejected his first request. And so they just kind of dragged the process out.
No, but Virginia Tech didn't send the appeal in until July.
Okay, that is kind of odd.
That's in Mike's article.
Saying the NCAA didn't respond.
No. They didn't. Well, the NCAA, I think the NCAA responded with a bunch of questions. They'd have new questions each week and things like that. That's why the process drug out. But why did the appeal take, from the original rejection in April, why did it take almost 3 months to...
Perhaps it took the Hoffman family that long to get together everything that I imagine was part of the second appeal. Again, I don't know. I haven't read Mike's articles.
Yeah.
By the way, Mike's article, really well done. But it had quotes from his dad in there, and then what they had to do to get to the NCAA. It does sound like there were multiple questions and multiple pieces of this appeal over.
And that can take a while.
Correct. I'm sure getting...
So that's probably the answer. So, I would like to react with outrage to all this, but for me, personally, I don't know if other people feel this way, but outrage, for me to feel outraged, there has to be an element of surprise to it.
Right.
Like, I can't believe so-and-so did that. I'm outraged.
I can't believe that jerk Buzz Williams left and went to Texas A&M. Some people were like that.
For example, Brent. So,
See, he's still mad at Brent. He expected him to leave, and he's still mad at him.
I'm not really mad at Brent. I do think it's funny to call him Brent, but I don't want to appear petty, But let's get back on the topic here. For me to feel outraged at the NCAA, I would have to be surprised by what they did, and I'm not the least bit surprised. So I don't have a whole lot more to say about it than that. The rest of the discussion centers around the depth chart and the lack of depth at center now. If Zachariah Hoyt goes down, who you got to play? John Harris? Is John Harris redshirt freshman?
Redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
You could also move Austin Cannon in there. I think he's had some experience at center in the past. I think Vance Weiss said earlier this preseason when he was interviewed that he's already repped like 7 guys at center at some point.
Well, that's how Vance Weiss rolls.
Right. Now how many of them could actually play?
I went in and repped a little bit.
Yeah.
Vance likes to do that.
Yeah.
What? Tell us a little bit more about Zachariah Hoyt, a guy who started 9 games last year at center and guard. What does he bring to the table?
I thought he was probably amongst the non-freshmen, probably Tech's most inconsistent lineman last year. There were some times where he struggled with his snapping. I don't think he was particularly strong at the point of attack, but he was a redshirt sophomore. Now he's a redshirt junior. You don't know about that extra year in the strength program and gaining experience.
I don't recall. Where's he from?
Roanoke, Salem, something like that. He's a fairly local guy.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So he's got experience. I think Hoffman would have been a physical upgrade, in my opinion. But so it hurts. Now, you know me, I'm all for redshirting as many people as possible and building for the future. So the way I see it, in 2021, Virginia Tech's going to have redshirt senior Brock Hoffman, redshirt senior Silas Janzi, senior Christian Darrisaw, redshirt senior Lacita Smith, junior Doug Nestor, redshirt junior Luke Tenuta. I mean that.
So this is part of what I wanted to talk about is the process of building a football program in your image, which is what Justin Fuente is doing, takes a long time. Mm-hmm. Getting Brock Hoffman in and getting him to play was just one small part of this process, and he's got to wait another year on that. And Chris just described, what year are you talking about?
2021.
2021. We got 2 more seasons to go through before we get there. Right. So Fuente's got some parts of this operation going like he wants it, like the receiving core, but the offensive line is still young. This is an ongoing process.
Well, he's filled the program with his players now, starting this year. Now he's just got to wait for him to grow up.
Yeah.
I mean, 4 seniors.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Now, I feel like one question that might come about this from a Tech fan you might see on social or the message boards is, wow, well, Tech had such a great recruiting class this year of the offensive line. They flipped a guy from Ohio State to Tech and Doug Nestor. Why not play him right now?
Well, they might play him. He's second on the depth chart. I mean, we don't know what the rotation's going to look like. Vance Weiss, at this time last year going into the Florida State game, Janzi was listed as first-team left tackle. When the game started, it was Christian Darrisaw who rolled out there. I mean, there's a constant competition. I mean, I heard Tenuta at one point last week, I think Tenuta would have started at right tackle with Janzi at right guard. But he didn't have a great end of the week of practice. He's a redshirt freshman. I guess he's still a little bit inconsistent. You never know how guys can hit a wall a little bit as
all the other
late in
students
camp.
showed up.
Stuff like that. You never know how young players are going to react to things like that. So Weiss flipped it back. He could flip it again in the middle of this week, and we just won't know about it.
I mean, the depth chart is the published depth chart is one thing. What actually gets rolled out on the field,
you're right.
I mean, different thing.
And speaking of the depth chart, which did come out on Monday, we did a preview for those that did not get a chance to listen. It's available archived, our podcast Monday, where we went through position groups and kind of gave our projected look at a depth chart and who the guys of the position group were standing out in the offseason. Now that it has come out, were there any surprises to you from what was released 2 days ago?
Not really.
As a matter of fact, the title of Chris's article is "No Surprises."
Yeah, that was pretty much it.
No big surprises.
No big surprises. You didn't know exactly where Dylan Rivers was going to factor in at linebacker because Bud experimented a little bit in the preseason. He wants to know what he'll do if Rashard Ashby gets hurt. Does he just roll with? Does he move? Basically, he's asking himself, do I move Dax Holyfield to Mike, or do I have someone else who can play that position? Are we better off with Dax Holyfield playing Mike and then Alan Tisdale coming into the game at backer, or are we better off with Holyfield staying at backer and somebody else playing Mike? And I think, he's tried Kashawn Artis at Mike, he's tried Dax at Mike, he's tried Dylan Rivers at Mike. And if you look at the depth chart now at Mike after Rashard Ashby, it's an or situation. It's Kashawn Artis or Dylan Rivers, and Dylan Rivers isn't listed at backer anymore, which means he's probably Virginia Tech's 4th option at backer. So you're talking about a guy. I'm using Rivers as an example. I could bring up some other examples also. You're talking about a guy who was at this time last year Virginia Tech's starting backer. Now he's our 4th best option at backer, and maybe our 3rd best or 4th best option at Mike, if depending on whether you include Dax Holyfield as a possibility at Mike. That's how much Virginia Tech's depth has improved at linebacker over the last year.
Yeah, and that's another position they've recruited really well.
Right, and you can say the same thing at defensive end. When Nathan Proctor transferred, he's the guy who had 98 snaps last year.
And now he's transferring.
And now he's transferring because he was like our 7th best option at defensive end. So that's how much the depth has improved. Now the problem is the depth is still, the 2 deep is redshirt freshman. Right, Taiwan Garbutt's a redshirt sophomore, and he's one of your cagey veterans of the defensive line. So there's still a long way to go. But from a personnel standpoint, 1 through 85, Virginia Tech's in a much better position than they were at this time a year ago.
Well, and they'll take that 1 through 85 into battle this Saturday. Virginia Tech and Boston College open up the 2019 college football season in Chestnut Hill. Hokies and Eagles, both their season openers, and this is the 3rd year in a row that Virginia Tech is going to play a pretty significant game. I would consider Boston College in that,
It's a conference game.
It's a conference game.
Based on the results of last year, yeah, it's a big game.
So, you go back to 2017, neutral site, West Virginia and Tech at FedEx Field. Last year at Florida State on Labor Day night. And then, or it was the Sunday night. Apologies. It was the Sunday. And then, of course, now at Boston College. What do you guys think about Tech playing these marquee games to open a season? Do you think the coaching staff enjoys that?
I think they enjoy it to a certain extent. I'm fine with it as long as it's not Alabama and Atlanta.
Yeah,
I mean,
don't want to do that. Well, it gets the team dialed in.
Yeah,
they
it does.
They got to prepare for a legit opponent, one that beat them last year.
Right.
So I like it, and I think the coaching staff likes it.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Like I said, no more Alabamas in Atlanta. I mean, that's just guaranteeing yourself a loss.
Yeah, Duke gets to be that.
Duke gets to start 0-1 this year.
Oh,
Congratulations,
gosh.
Duke.
That's right. That's a Chick-fil-A kickoff game this year,
And
right?
it's not
Alabama
even a
Duke.
night game. It's like a 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
So you get a $2 million check to lose a game.
You know, I read that Alabama's getting $4.5 million for that game.
Oh, if Duke,
Well, you know, Alabama's suffering. They need the money.
sure, yeah. Yeah,
I thought you were being serious there for a minute. Well, I didn't see the sarcasm until the end.
but as far as this goes, yes, I think it's good. And it's a challenging game, but it's also a winnable game, which I do think is good for off-season preparation. I think it's good for, particularly once practice starts in August. You don't have to wait until week 3. I mean, it used to be everybody's schedules were kind of streamlined. Remember the old Big East days? A lot of times it was just 3 cupcakes, and then the Big East schedule starts.
Depends upon if you're talking 11 or 12 game
Right.
season, but it'd be 3 or 4 out of conference games,
Right.
then nothing but Big East games.
And even if we started off with like a Big East opponent, it was like Rutgers. Remember that 50-0 game in '97?
59-0.
Yeah.
Man, that's one of the hottest games I've ever been to. Wow. I actually drove up to New Jersey to watch
Virginia Tech play Rutgers.
To watch Virginia Tech gobsmack Rutgers.
Tech wasn't even that good that
And
year.
good to know
Marcus
that-
Gildersleeve, baby, he's going to be a star. I shouldn't
Yeah.
say that. Marcus is active on Twitter. And
Good to know that
he's a good
22
dude who
years-
loved Virginia Tech.
22 years later, Rutgers really hasn't changed much as a program.
It changed briefly under Shiano.
Yeah,
Yeah,
tell you
that's
what,
right.
man, Shiano had him going. That was quite a
That's right.
story.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Let's. I want to go back to last year's game, Virginia Tech and Boston College, a game that Virginia Tech led at halftime, fell 31-21. There were, when you look at that game in a box, there were actually some positives to take away from that. But how much of a translation is there? How much can you take away as a coaching staff from that game late in the season, a part of off-season prep, especially when it's the same quarterback and running back coming back for BC?
Yeah, I think you certainly can go back and look for certain things in that game. And I think as a player, maybe you take I don't know if you take any confidence from as a player or not, because ultimately you lost the game. And in fact, that's the last football game that Boston College won.
Was that the game where Tech was doing pretty good and then Ryan Willis got blasted? And
Hooker came in and fumbled a snap.
Yep.
yeah.
Quincy
around
Patterson saw some
midfield.
time.
And I think Ryan came back in the second
he
half.
did, he did.
But the Tech got shut out in the third quarter.
See, that was generally last year. The offense would come out hot against Georgia Tech, and it's 21-21, but the defense would just give up a touchdown every drive. So eventually the offense would it's hard to keep up that pace. Same thing against Pitt. It's 17-0 Pitt, just like that, because we can't stop them.
Yeah.
Yep, Tech was up 14-7 at half. BC scored 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, shut out Tech, and then 10 points to Tech, 7 in the fourth. So they outscored them 24-7 in the second half.
Yeah.
And this was a game where the offense stalled. This was a game where it was mostly the offense's fault, in my opinion. I think stretching out both halves. I think there was something like 4 or 5 3-and-outs in a row or something like that.
Oh, and there was another play where Willis hit Damon Hazelton in the chest,
and he dropped it, and it led to and it got picked off,
right,
and led to a short field Boston College touchdown. So, and I think Virginia Tech's lack of ability to stay on the field on offense really it wore Virginia Tech's defense down in the second half. If you look at time of possession, Virginia Tech had the advantage in the first half. BC had the advantage in the second half, and eventually Tech's younger, smaller defense got worn down by that rushing attack. So that was one of the few games last year where I thought that game was the offense's fault. I think the Tech offense will do better this year.
Now, statistically, it wasn't a bad day for Willis. 25 of 42, 281 yards and 3 touchdowns, 1 pick.
And the pick wasn't his fault.
That's right. It was the rushing that really stands out in the box score. The leading rusher that game against Boston College. Who do you think it was that game?
I think it was Ryan Willis.
It was Ryan Willis.
Somebody said that on the boards the other day.
49 yards. People said 39 yards. So it feels like running the football. And we talked about it on Monday with Jalen Holston, his emergence of the great camp that he's had. McLeese, Keshawn King. You got a healthy Terrius Wheatley. How big will running the football be in this game compared to last year?
Oh, it's huge. I think Virginia Tech will be able to throw the ball for sure. So if they can run it too, then they're going to score a lot of points. I mean, Virginia's at football here, right? If you can run the ball and throw it, you're going to score.
If you can run the ball and throw the ball, you're going to score a lot of points.
But Coach Chris Coleman, everybody.
Yeah,
Good thing this podcast is free.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, if they can run the ball against BC, unless the defense just has an awful day, they're going to win the game.
So let's break it down a little bit. We've put together our preview. We haven't run it yet, but Chris wrote it and I edited it last night and added my part. BC is replacing a lot of guys on defense. I think, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, they bring back a couple of defensive linemen with fairly significant snaps.
Yeah, but also a couple with 0 snaps.
Exactly.
But they're both their defensive ends last year in the NFL right now.
Yeah, great players. I would have taken one or both of them.
Yeah, they had a cornerback who led the country in interceptions last year.
Hamp
Cheevers, one of the best names you'll see.
That is a great name.
That's a great name.
He's one of those guys who declared for the draft and got on a mini camp and wasn't even on a roster in the preseason.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I don't.
So that contributed to a really depleted secondary where they're bringing back one starter.
One
is that correct?
one starter, I think, and I think they're starting strong safety. He's a redshirt senior. I think he played 27 snaps last year, and he's been one of those guys who only gets on the field in garbage time his entire career.
Yeah.
So he's got experience in the program, but not sure how good he is. Not sure how good their second. They got one cornerback who I think is a pretty good player. Not sure how good their other corner is. Their free safety has some experience in a backup role, but unclear how.
Is this a pretty reasonable defense to open up against? Would you say?
I think so.
I think so totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be. They're good enough to provide a test, and you'll learn a lot about yourself. But
I really like the matchup of Tech's receivers against Boston College's defense.
I don't think Tech should struggle against them like they did last year.
So let's look now at the Boston College offense, because that's definitely the stronger side of the football for Boston College. When you return your quarterback and Anthony Brown, and then you of course return, as Coach Fuente said, probably one of the best at his position in the ACC. I think personally one of the best running backs in the country. I was surprised that A.J. Dillon did not declare for the NFL draft.
Well, he couldn't.
I thought he could have.
Well, he's only a sophomore.
He was only a true sophomore.
There you go. Well, he's got NFL potential. Right now. He's a power back. Last year against Tech, 24 attempts, 96 yards, a touchdown, a long of 17. What kind of threats does he pose to the Tech defense?
Well,
he outweighs 9 of Tech's starting defenders, isn't that right?
Including both starting defensive ends, including both starting defensive ends. I mean, he's 6 foot 250 pounds. He's massive. And I'm not trying to disrespect Virginia Tech's defensive ends, because there are a lot of defensive ends in the country that he outweighs. He's just a big man, and you've got to gang tackle him around the line of scrimmage. You can't let him get ahead of steam where he's running downhill. I mean, you can't put him on a one-on-one situation with Caleb Farley in the open field and expect a good result. And that's not a, Caleb wasn't a good tackling cornerback last year, but it also shows, that there's a reason coaches want their defenders to swarm to the ball carrier. I mean, they don't want their cornerbacks. Quarterbacks are traditionally your worst tacklers. You don't want them in one-on-one situations. And the thing about all Farley's missed tackles last year, if you look at it, he's the only one around the ball carrier. At least he's there. Everybody else was busy getting blocked or running in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And so you don't want Caleb Farley will look like a better tackler this year if you don't put him in a situation where he has to tackle 250-pound running backs in the open field, which anybody would struggle to do.
So how much do you know off the top of your head how much Rayshard Ashby weighs?
235, 240.
I was going to guess 235, 237.
Yeah.
Dax is about 232, 235.
Yeah.
So, Dax has reshaped his body. He was thicker and heavier last year. He wasn't as muscular, So I'm looking forward to seeing that collision. You might see that out on the edge.
So you just got to tackle him around the line of scrimmage. And Tech did a good job of that last year. They did a good job on Dillon last year. Mm-hmm. Remember
they dinged him up early.
They played Devon Diablo at whip and started, I guess, Tyree Rogers at free safety. They wanted to get a bigger body in the box. Won't have to do that this year because you've got Chamari Connor, who's a big physical guy at whip.
So A.J. Dillon provides more of a threat on the ground, or returning quarterback Anthony Brown provides more of a threat through the air?
Dillon, for sure. If it turns out that Brown provides more of a threat, that means he's going to have a great year, and Boston College is going to have a great year. He made massive strides between his freshman and sophomore seasons.
If he makes another jump like that, it's going to be trouble for everybody else.
I don't know how much better he can get, though, with their receivers. Like, I think they don't have a good receiving core, in my opinion.
So I was reading your review, your preview, and it sounded like they've got two guys that can go back and forth between receiver and tailback.
They do. I think
that's unusual.
I think that they're 4 deep at tailback, but 2 of those guys are technically in the 2 deep at wide receiver.
And I think
one of those guys is Travis Levy, who had 11 carries for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns against Tech last year in Lane Stadium.
He had one fairly long run that was poorly defended. But I think the point I was going to make is I think that says more about Boston College's receiving core in a bad way.
Right, correct.
That they've got guys doubling up between tailback and receiver.
Between tailback and receiver, and then one of the other receivers in the 2 deep is a true freshman. So I don't fear their receivers. Now they got a deep group of tight ends, and you'll see 2 tight ends on the field all the time. But they're just not. They're not a dynamic passing attack at all.
Let me ask you this. Is this a storyline, non-storyline? Will this have an impact at all? Of course, Scott Loeffler, the offensive coordinator of Boston College, is gone. He's now the head coach at Bowling Green, former OC at Virginia Tech. With a new OC, game 1, any kind of impact that could have?
They got a new defensive coordinator also. Now they promoted him from within. I think Steve Adazio's offenses, I think they're limited with their personnel. I don't know how much different they can look. When you don't have any, when you got one ACC caliber receiver, in my opinion, is a true wide receiver, I don't know, there's just not so much you can do, in my opinion. Just like there wasn't much Loeffler could do when he got to Virginia Tech. He didn't have anybody who could catch a football.
And to a large extent, the head coach kind of dictates what sort of offense you're going to run.
Right.
So this guy may have a few different wrinkles. Maybe he'll get a playoff here and there, but I don't see it really changing their offense.
Right, exactly. And the combination of Justin Fuente and Bud Foster has been awesome in early season games at Virginia Tech. I mean, they completely outcoached Tennessee, fumbled that football game away. They beat West Virginia in a neutral site game. They had no business scoring 31 points on West Virginia that night. They had a freshman quarterback making his first career start. They started a tight end, a true freshman tight end in Dalton Keene, who never played tight end in high school. They started a true freshman slot receiver in Sean Savoy, who got switched to cornerback at Maryland. Eric Kuma started that game. Chris Cunningham played a huge role. Both those guys play for Old Dominion now. I mean, Tech went into that game without very much talent and still scored 31 points and put up 450 yards or so against West Virginia. And then last year they went down to Tallahassee and smacked Florida State. I mean, Fuente and Foster together, the combination, I mean, they've coached circles around people when they've had a whole offseason to prepare for.
And a healthy team.
Right.
Let's add that part of it.
Right, exactly. And hadn't been the case for Adazio. In his 7 years at BC, he's 2-5 in his first FBS or Power 5 game of the season.
Yeah.
And both those wins were against Wake Forest. So I feel very good about this game from a coaching perspective. The fact that Virginia Tech has more experienced players this year and in a few positions better players. But there's still a whole lot of unknown. But I'm still more scared of us than I am of Boston College, to be honest with you, because they're so one-dimensional offensively.
Justin Fuente is 3-0 in season openers as his time as the head coach of Virginia Tech. That's Florida State, West Virginia, and Liberty.
Liberty.
Oh yeah, that was
like
the college debut of Buckshot Calvert.
That's right.
The Liberty quarterback.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of Liberty, real quick, you know who they opened up with this year? Did you guys see that?
No.
They opened up their season at home against top 25 Syracuse.
No, our fans are complaining about playing at Liberty. What do you think?
There's a whole bunch of teams traveling to Liberty.
Everybody's going to Liberty.
Hey, it's the season debut of the new head coach, Hugh Freeze. So it'll be interesting to see
is he going to be able to coach? Literally, that poor guy was almost on his deathbed recently.
Yeah.
Oh, I did not even know.
I've only seen headlines and mentions of it.
Yeah, I forget exactly what happened because he wasn't able to coach when practice opened, I think, or even up to a couple weeks ago. So I don't know what their situation is right now.
This is a reminder that the Tech Sideline Podcast is presented by the Fisher Law Firm. Glad everybody could be with us today, whether you're watching either live or archived or listening to the Tech Sideline Podcast with Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes that we'll get to in a little bit. Will Stewart, Chris Coleman, I'm Evan Hughes. Guys, let's now transition into prediction time for the game. And we have a little bit of time to kind of talk about the season as a whole before we wrap up the podcast. Yes, sir.
So we do our game previews, and so I go through Chris's game preview, I edit it, but when he gets to the part where he makes his prediction, I stop and I go right up my prediction. And we've fallen into this pattern of basically predicting almost identical scores or identical scores over the years. We're like an old married couple. We're around each other too much.
The dynamic duo.
And so what'd you pick? Did you pick 31-21? No,
well, 31-23 or something.
He picked 31-23. I picked 31-21. We both picked the Hokies, right?
Score 31, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the score of last year's game, 31-21 Boston College.
Yeah, I said I'm flipping it. So here's a stat for you, and I put this in my articles. In their last 16 ACC games, the Hokies have only scored over 30 points 3 times. I'm thinking they're going to at least match that this year, maybe more, and it's going to start with this game. 31 is a little conservative, but Boston College does have the ability to control the football a little bit, and the thing you can, and this is the difficulty of predicting games, you can never predict special teams plays and turnovers and things like that. And once that stuff starts happening, you look at that Miami game and that Miami-Florida game, that's ridiculous. There was so many penalties.
Miami almost won the game off of pass interference calls.
I don't think, remembering the West Virginia Tech game, that was a fairly well played game. Virginia Tech did not play well against Tennessee. Virginia Tech did play well defensively at Florida State, and got a special teams touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
But there typically haven't been wild things going on in their early games, so I'm going with 31-21.
In 2016, it was Fuente's first season, and it's a lot of new players getting used to new offenses, and there were fumbled snaps. It was a new quarterback, a new center. It was new everything. Yeah. The last 2 years, when everything wasn't new, Virginia Tech, really they won those 2 games because they did the direct opposite of what Miami did on Saturday night. They didn't go out there and screw it up.
Yeah.
I mean, Miami, if they had just not screwed it up, would have won that football game.
Right.
And Virginia Tech, they did not have a single turnover against West Virginia. They didn't have a single turnover against Florida State, and they won.
Yeah, well, there you go.
If Tech can go up there and just don't turn the ball over against BC, then I know it sounds cliche. The key to the game is not turning the ball over.
Coach Chris Coleman here.
But it's true. It's true. Tech's offense is good enough to score enough points to win the game if they don't hand BC free points, in my opinion.
So there you go. That's it.
We'll close the Boston College section with this. When we do the podcast on Monday recapping the game, the Virginia Tech player we talk about in a Tech win is who?
You want to go first or me?
Just right off the top of my head, Keshawn King.
Oh, man, that would be awesome.
That's optimistic. That would be awesome.
Shamari Connor. I just remember Divine Diablo playing such a big role. Did he have like 14 tackles or 15 tackles or something like that from the whip spot?
Recall.
Yeah, because Ricardo Kearney made his first career start in Mike and had like 18 tackles.
Yeah.
And I think Diablo had like 14 or 15. And Dax had a bunch too.
Yeah.
So I think the whip spot's going to be heavily involved in this game. So that's my prediction. Jamari Connor, the new starter at whip.
So there you have it. Chris Coleman and Will Stewart both say Hokies win their season opener against Boston College. Again, that's this Saturday, 4 o'clock on the ACC Network. Guys, have you gotten your subscriptions yet? And if you have, how are you enjoying the channel so far?
Oh, let's see. So far, it's been a Coach K love fest, and last night they showed the 2007 Virginia Tech Boston College game. Let me run off and call Comcast so I can watch all this great programming.
But they also had what's the name of Packers?
I think it's a great show so far. Absolutely.
They had Tony Roby on,
Fair
and
enough,
they had Mike Young on, and I haven't had a chance to watch.
But I don't get the ACC network. I have Comcast, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I don't have a plan yet. I'm a Dish Network subscriber, so I'm out.
I'm thinking about ditching Comcast for YouTube TV anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't find myself watching that much TV anyway.
Yeah.
So I
You've
think
got
I'll
your
probably
grades
spend too much money on it.
So cut your bill, yeah.
All right, well, guys, let's do this. We've got a little bit of time here. I want to spend maybe.
So how are we doing on time? What are we at?
We're at 50 minutes.
All right, so we need to take some questions and such from Facebook, right?
Do we?
Well, we
I
promised.
don't think
that
that
we
was
were
an editorial schedule.
well, we promised we were
It's
going.
just
to.
our friends on the podcast can't hear. That's the only thing
Yeah, okay.
from the.
So we got some
let's-
technical issues to get worked out.
Which we can
But we can repeat the question.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's get some questions in here, and then Malcolm Stewart, the Malcolm related Stewart,
Don't forget to unmute your microphone.
the best in the biz. What we got over there, my friend?
So has anybody asked anything good?
You kind of just the only question we've got is will Comcast and the ACC network reach an agreement?
So for those, the question is, will Comcast and the ACC network reach an agreement?
I expect they will. I don't think it's going to be between
It's
now
not
and
gonna happen
Saturday.
before Saturday's game.
Yeah, I don't think it will at this point. I'd be very
It's funny.
surprised.
People ask us as if we have some clue what's going on.
I don't know. I don't know anything about TV negotiations. I don't understand how that worked. If I did, I guess I'd probably be working for a TV company making a lot of money. I don't think that's just something a lot of people get unless you're in that industry.
It just appears to me that what you see right now is what you're going to get.
Yeah,
As far as carriage.
No, you never know. I mean, I think when the SEC network got released, they had a couple of last-minute deals a night or two before the network launched, but I just don't see that happening in this case. I think Comcast, I think they'll hardball it for as long as they can, and there's something about an ESPN deal with Comcast or Dish Network or something like that that's up for renewal in 2021. So they think that'll
right. Yep.
that could affect things. It might be a
So
couple
it
of years.
might-
That's what some people think.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it might take 1 to 3 years to get full carriage
Right.
of this
Right.
network.
And by the way, if you want to threaten Comcast, calling them up and saying I'd really like the ACC network, you should get it. Gosh darn it, that's not going to work. Because until people actually start canceling their,
You're talking to a minion on the phone.
you're talking to a minion on the phone who probably doesn't even know what the heck the ACC network is.
Well, they've probably heard about it.
They've heard about it now, but you've heard stories. People have posted on our board. Oh, I called this company, I called that company, and they didn't know what the ACC network was. Well, guess what? Not everybody's a college sports fan.
Now Dish
So-
has been really good,
Right.
Particularly on Twitter. I added them and said something about the ACC network, and they DM'd me. DM'd? Or they responded to the tweet and said, hey, we'll submit
Right.
a programming request on your behalf.
Oh wow!
So Dish has been, at the very least on Twitter, has been really good about it.
Yeah, so I'll take it a step further than what the ACC is encouraging you to do. They're basically saying, "Oh, call your provider and say that you'd like the ACC network." Well, I'm telling you, if you've got Comcast, call them and cancel if you really want the ACC network
Yeah.
bad enough. Just telling them that you want something, okay, that's not costing them any money.
Now, the ACC has said, call them, tell them you want it, and threaten to change.
Okay.
They did include that as part of their
Even
narrative.
just threatening to change. I'm sure they have a certain number. I'm sure they've done the research on the number of people who call in to threaten to change. Of how many of those people?
What percentage?
I mean, we know this. People threaten to cancel their subscription sometime, and then hardly any of them do.
There's a story there.
There's a story there, but
So let's tell the story. So I wrote at the end of the 2012 season, which was Frank's first rough non-10 win season. I wrote an article called Endgame, where I started talking about the end of Frank Beamer's career. His career went on another 3 years. If you go back and look at that article, it's from 2012, December of 2012. It's got about 130 comments, including about 10 people saying, I'm done. I don't appreciate you talking about this. I'm canceling my subscription, etc. I did the research, and out of those 10 or so people, all but 1 or 2 of them are still on the site, still subscribing, still, commenting on the message boards and things like that. So that's our data point on how many people threaten and how many actually do it.
right. So when you call Comcast or whoever, don't just threaten. Actually do it. That's the only way.
See, I'm
that
calling to
they're gonna
cancel
listen.
my service because you're not carrying the ACC network.
Yep.
All right, I'll ask you guys a fun question here. I was talking with Chris before we went on about great Virginia Tech Boston College moments since the two have began playing. What sticks out most when you think about BC Virginia Tech in wins? We don't need to go to a certain place in 2007.
Well, to me, what stands out in 1999, it clinched the unbeaten season, and I remember back then, even going into 1999, and you remember every game was sold out from the UVA game in '98 through 2012, basically.
Yeah.
And But still, in '99, the season tickets didn't sell out. You could still buy individual game tickets to every game that year. And I remember after the UAB game, the second game of the season, I went to that game with my dad, and Tech won that game without Vic at quarterback. And I looked at the schedule and looked at Tech's roster and thought, we're going to win every game we play this year. So I told my dad, order tickets to the Boston College game. We need to go to that game too because we're going to clinch an unbeaten season that night. Sure enough, we did, and I was there for that. I was a junior in high school, so that's the one that stands out to me. An
interesting story about that game. Somebody came on our message boards the other day and said that they talked with one of the assistant coaches from that Virginia Tech coaching squad, and this person didn't identify the coach they were talking to, but that coach said words to the effect of, "You don't know how hard it is to go undefeated, and towards the end, how difficult it is to close out a season like that." And that's in contrast to the way I felt as a fan. I went into that game as a fan thinking, man, they're going to roll Boston College. This is going to be fun. And they did. It was 38-14. Vic completed, 15 of 12 passes for 9,000 yards. He did his thing. Andre Davis did their thing. And they won. But the coach was saying, you have no idea how afraid we were of what might happen that day.
And he means the coaches. He doesn't necessarily mean the players. I think the Tech coach or the Tech players were confident the whole way through.
Yeah,
So-
I agree with that.
As someone who was 4 months old at that time, I ask you this because, what was the scene like after they clinched that game?
Oh,
I know
man.
there's a legendary picture of Coach Beamer, but was everybody just going nuts in the stands?
So many famous pictures from that game, though. The one of Beamer, the one of Vic getting carried around in the crowd, and also the one of the sunset behind the west stands.
Yeah,
That was actually, I think Sports Illustrated did their article recently, like the 50 greatest college football pictures of all time, or something like that. And that was the picture they used for their tweet, for the headline of that
we
article.
should really have that up there.
Yeah,
on the
we really
television
should.
so we
So
can
I don't
see
know
that.
if you've seen the one we're talking about. I think you could even get that picture on credit
Well,
cards.
turn around,
and
look
things
over your
like
right
that.
shoulder. See the
Oh,
thing on there? There
That's
it is.
part of it. That's the left hand.
Half of it. Yes.
Yeah, you could actually see the sunset off to the right.
Wow.
In it. But yeah, so there's so many things. Yeah, the scene at the end of the game was crazy. I mean, you had people tearing down goalposts, obviously things like that. Will found a picture yesterday, and back in the '90s, people didn't necessarily wear team gear to games until like the mid '90s, and it wasn't even really until the 2000s. Everybody did it, and one of the guys on the goalpost for that game was wearing Miami Dolphins jacket, Miami Dolphins hat.
Yeah,
crazy.
So I was looking at a section that the Roanoke Times produced after that game, and you're asking about pictures. There were two great pictures from that game. Now, Matt Gentry is a longtime photographer for Virginia for the Roanoke Times. One of the best pictures from that game, Matt didn't actually take. I don't remember the photographer's name, but was it Cullen Hawkins that came out of the backfield and ran some sort of fullback wheel route?
Yeah.
And
It's
dove
Cullen
and caught a touchdown pass. And there's a picture taken from the back corner of the end zone of Hawkins laying on the ground holding the ball up in the air and the ref standing over him signaling touchdown. It's a great picture. It's perfectly framed. And to tell you how old it is, the ref is wearing white pants, which, those white blousey things that they don't wear anymore. And then there was Chris talking about the fans hanging off the goalposts. And, the one guy decked out in Miami Dolphins gear.
Was that you secretly in your Miami Dolphins gear?
By then, well, I was probably still a Dolphins fan by then. I think Marino was still playing. But that was back when the field was full of fans afterward. It was packed.
And
they didn't have collapsible goalposts at that point.
That's
You
right.
actually
You
had
had
to
to
pull
tear
those
them
suckers
down,
down.
man. Yeah.
And I'm assuming that at that point, when Tech won, they knew they were playing for the national championship.
They didn't know it.
They did not know.
Because Nebraska, there was still a possibility that Nebraska could get in. And I remember this like it was yesterday. They were showing updates from the Colorado-Nebraska game, which was going on at the time.
Yeah, we're all hanging around in the stadium afterwards, and they're
trying to
shooting
keep up
updates.
with the score on that little tiny scoreboard in the south end zone,
Yeah.
right? They incorrectly announced that Colorado beat Nebraska during the post-game
Which would have
celebration.
been good for Virginia Tech.
Which would have been good for Virginia Tech. As it turned out, I think that game went to overtime. I don't remember who won, but it wasn't over at that point. I think Nebraska did, and they ended up winning the game, but Tech still got in over them in the BCS. But I was sure Tech was going. And you're never really sure, but I was.
Well, I was sure because the NCAA wasn't in control of the process.
Right.
The BCS was.
Here goes with this conspiracy.
So was there again, I'm assuming there was like a BCS show once a week on ESPN like it was for some time. Is that how Tech officially found out? I mean, just that was the
gosh, what night was it? The very next night? Whenever no, it had to have been the next week. Because they had conference championship games at that point. Well, it would have been just like it is now, I guess. The next Saturday, you play the conference championship games, and then the next day, on Sunday, is your football selection Sunday. And back then, it was 4 BCS games. So they'd start with one of the non-national championship BCS games. So that year, the national title game was the Sugar Bowl. So I guess they probably started with one of the small ones, or did they start the show?
Yeah, honestly,
Virginia Tech and
I don't
Florida State?
recall.
I don't remember.
Oh, I'm sure
there's
I've got
a video
it on VHS tapes.
Yeah, I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. I'm sure it's on Hokie tapes.
Yeah, Hokie tapes does such a great job of. I actually got the chance to go back and watch the first drive of that national championship.
And that was when Lee Corso predicted before the season started that Virginia Tech and Florida State would play for the national championship, and that's exactly what happened.
And this year, Corso has Utah in his Final Four, so we'll see how that all comes about.
We'll see.
Well, Malcolm, I'll turn it over to you one last time. Our producer finds any parting words before we sign off?
Like a question?
Or anything. Yeah, questions, comments?
Actually, yeah, if you've got a couple minutes, they want to know about the stuff on the shelves.
Oh, should we point out every single one of them?
Yeah, so
I really like the Hokies are sharp, dadgummit. A lot of people won't get that.
So the podcast people will love this because they can't see a thing. But I added shelves to the set last night, and a lot of the stuff on the shelves has a story. Some of it doesn't. It's just stuff that somebody bought and gave to me. And we really ought to do a separate video. But to give you a quick rundown, there's a box of Hokie Toasties sitting up there. I got a little mini Seth Greenberg autographed Virginia Tech basketball.
That's worth a lot of money. You should probably put that away.
That's right. The signature's starting to fade, sadly. I have so there's a signed football there, Evan, that's right next to you. You see a bunch of and I saw Chris looking at that earlier, probably trying to figure out who some of those names
There's
are.
Jim Cavanaugh's
a lot
autograph.
of chicken scratch up there.
Yeah, it was signed by all the coaches and some of the players. Brian Randall's signature's probably on there. That's from 2004.
Vincent Fuller's on there.
Yeah. So I've got a couple old things here, and Bourbon Street noticed this because he gave it to me. Right behind my head is a Virginia Polytechnic Institute megaphone. It's a really old megaphone. It's like 8 inches long. It's a little tiny thing, and it's got a V and a P on it. It's extremely old school, probably from way back in Miles Stadium days. And there's also a little thing, and it says the Hokies are sharp, dadgummit.
Sharp with an E.
And that is from the 70s when Virginia Tech hired Jimmy Sharp to be their football coach. So it says the Hokies are sharp. It's spelled with an E like Jimmy Sharp's name was.
I used to say dadgummit a lot. Now, what modern Tech fans would hate about that is at the bottom it says support Va Tech football. So we used to call ourselves Va Tech back in the day, apparently.
That's right. Well, that was before we went through. They went through a branding exercise at some point in the '80s and decided to be consistent.
Yeah.
And now, one of the more interesting things I have up there, and this is a one-of-a-kind item. You see up on the very top shelf, there's a dish. It's some white dish, and it's some slap-together production. It's got the Hokie bird in the middle, and it's got Virginia Tech Hokies taped around the side of it. So I live in Radford, all right, and this is it's an interesting story. I live in the High Meadows subdivision of Radford. I'm hanging out in my house one day. I don't remember when this was. Maybe Chris can help with the era.
07, 08, something
There's
like
a
that.
knock at the door, and I go to the door. And there's a somewhat large young black man standing there, and he's selling Virginia Tech stuff. And I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but I looked at him and I thought, that's Tarek Peak. And Tarek and Nubian Peak were brothers who played at Pulaski County High School. I don't remember if they were in the same class or not, but they both committed to Virginia Tech, signed with Virginia Tech. Neither one of them did anything in their Virginia Tech careers. And Tarek, I think he wound up, down at Texas A&M or Texas Tech or something like that for about a year or so. He was going door to door because he didn't get into the details, but he'd done something bad, and his dad was making him go door to door and sell this Virginia Tech stuff that his mom had made. That was his punishment, to go door to door and sell stuff. So I'm sure there were several licensing and recruiting violations committed there as I bought that slapdash plate from him. But I'm like, this is Tarek Peak selling crap at my door, man. I got to buy one. So that's the story behind the plate up there on the top.
So we need to find him, contact him, and tell him that is now up on our set.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
It is one of the more interesting items up there. Yeah.
Awesome.
So anything else, Malcolm? Anybody criticizing the set today?
No.
Oh, nice. Now we do have to hang. We're going to hang curtains.
Actually, I take that back. We still need to build out the sides a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So I was about to address that about building out the sides, because there's a little bit of gap behind me and Evan, and so the things we need to continue working on are the lighting needs to get better. I do need to hang. I'll probably just hang black curtains to frame the edges and stop showing the edges in the shot. And the other thing is I want to go to multiple camera angles. I want to be able to cut, like when Chris is talking, cut to Chris. When I'm talking, cut to me. Right now we've only got the one camera that shows the whole scene.
It's a lot of exciting things going on at Tech Sideline. It certainly is. And I'll close with this. What can we expect the rest of the week on TechSideline.com? What great content do we have coming up?
A lot. We've got the game preview coming up today. We're going to have another article from Corey. We're going to have an article from Brandon Patterson. If I have time between all this editing, I'm going to write an Inside the Numbers article for tomorrow, Friday Q&A. I think Jason Stame is due to send us 2 more articles. So
I got to go from recording this podcast to sit down and do a roster card. I still haven't done a roster card yet.
Well, it's going to be another busy week. It is game week. It is upon us. It is also game week for us here at Tech Sideline, and we're so thankful to all of our viewers and our listeners that you guys could tune in for 2 podcasts this week, and we'll be back doing it all again.
We're thankful to our sponsor, Fisher Law Firm.
We are always thankful to Fisher Law Firm.
Now, before you sign off, I did not put a new song lyric in my Twitter bio, but I did get it driving on the way in this morning. This is easy. This is a layup, I think, anyway. Well, it's a long way to Richmond, rolling up on 95.
I actually know that one.
Modern Day Bonnie and Clyde by Travis Tritt.
Oh,
good video.
I love that song.
Travis Tritt's a great musician.
He just plays a little vocal range at one point in that. He goes, ee-hoo. Gets a little high there. And the video's got Billy Bob Thornton in it. I guess they were buddies or something like that. I'm sure Wikipedia knows the whole story.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's podcast. Thanks so much, guys. Always as fun as always. And, again, we'll break down the Boston College game on Monday, probably around the same time. Same way you watched or you listened. You can get your podcast anywhere on SoundCloud or Apple Podcasts. We'll be back on Facebook and more on Monday. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast, brought to you by the Fisher Law Firm. Call 1-800-680-7031 to get your free consultation anytime. For our producer behind the scenes, Malcolm Stewart, or our managing editor, Chris Coleman, our founder and head honcho, Will Stewart, my name is Evan Hughes, saying thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time right here on the Tech Sideline Podcast.